Hi and welcome. I'm Antoinette Trimble, a registered architect, and I'm joined by my colleague Allison Tsao, who is not an architect, but an organisation development practitioner.
This video is part of a series developed with the Architects Registration Board of Victoria to help registered architects communicate more effectively with their clients. Today, we're talking about managing scope creep, how to start a project in a way that prevents it, what to do in that first client meeting, and how to handle it when it eventually happens anyway.
Change is really important in the design process. Changes in design can often lead to innovative solutions, so knowing that changes should and will happen, the question is whether you have a solid process to avoid unmonitored change or scope creep. Let's get into it.
To be clear, scope creep is not just formal variations. It's unmonitored changes to a project which results in changes to the scope of work and can often result in the architect doing unpaid work. Scope creep rarely starts mid-project. It starts at the very beginning, when the brief is vague, when assumptions go unstated, or when everyone leaves that first meeting with a slightly different picture of what's been agreed to. The best protection against scope creep is a strong start.
And that means doing two things before any design work begins. First, develop a written project brief. Whether the client brings one or you build it together, the brief needs to be documented. What's the purpose of the project? What elements should be included? What are the non-negotiables? What's the budget? What's the timeline? In more complex and poorly defined projects, you may need to do research or engage with leaders and stakeholders to better define the needs of the project. In my experience working in this area, it is always better to co-create the brief with the client so they have ownership in the outcome. Secondly, the final brief should always be confirmed in writing with a formal sign-off,
And why does that confirmation step matter so much?
because it creates a shared baseline. Scope creep is almost always the gap between what the client thought was agreed implicitly and what the architect thought was agreed. A confirmed written brief or scope closes that gap before the project starts and gives you something concrete to refer back to when things shift.
The first meeting sets the tone for the whole project. What should architects be covering beyond just the brief in that first meeting?
Well, I think there's three things. First, be explicit that changes to the brief or the design have consequences for time and for fee potentially. You don't need to be heavy-handed about it. Just say it plainly. You might say, as the design develops, it's completely normal for ideas to evolve. What I'd ask is that when something changes, we talk about it early so I can let you know what's involved before we proceed. That one sentence said at the first meeting makes every scope conversation easier later on.
And what are the other two?
Well, the second one is to establish the process for approving changes. So who's responsible? Who has authority? On a commercial or government project, it can be much more complex. There might be a board, a project manager, a property rep, or an executive. Knowing who can say yes and who can't prevents a lot of wasted work. And the third one is to agree on how changes will be handled practically. Tell the client upfront, if you ask for something outside the brief, I'll confirm it in writing with a note with the cost and time impact before I do anything. That way, there are never any surprises on either side. Frame it as a protection for them, not a process for you.
Even with a strong start, scope will shift. What's the right response when a client asks for something that's clearly outside what was agreed to?
Well, I think name it immediately, no matter how small. Don't absorb it and hope for the best. The moment a request feels outside of scope, say so warmly and directly. That's a great idea. It's outside of what we've agreed so far. Let me put a quick note on what's involved and we can decide together how to proceed. Then document it in writing before you begin any work.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The instinct to just absorb small requests to keep the client happy is understandable, but those small things add up and they're much harder to recoup at the end of a project than they are to address in the moment.
And use that brief as your anchor. When a request arrives that feels out of scope, go back to the agreed brief together and your proposal. It's not confrontational, it's professional. It shows the client you're managing the project carefully on their behalf.
To recap, start every project with a confirmed written brief. At your first meeting, set expectations clearly about how changes will be handled. And when scope shifts, name it immediately and document it before doing any work. Scope creep is preventable, not by being rigid, but by being clear from the start. Managing scope creep is a big topic. In our learning engagements with architects, it comes up again and again and again as an issue. So much so that we decided to create a whole learning module about it. If you would like to learn more about upskilling to manage scope creep, our online course, just go to our CPD for Architects learning site. The link is included at the end of this video.
And remember, the clients who feel most frustrated are rarely the ones whose brief changed. They're the ones who felt surprised by the consequences. Remove the surprise and you remove the conflict.
Thanks for watching.